Hello, good afternoon. It is your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, and today's date is Tuesday, September the 9th, 2025. The time is 1:10 p.m., and I am in the Brickell district of Miami, Florida. The title of this lecture is Extrajudicial. And before I get into this lecture, I would like to include a disclaimer. And this disclaimer is directly, candidly, and unequivocally aimed at select listeners that I have, particularly the ones that tune into my program and observe written posts, articles, and so forth, and listen to my videos with the expectation that they're going to be able to comb through my words, nitpick their meanings, create false narratives concerning what I say, and applying those false narratives to the libel, character defamation, and slander mechanism that you gang stalkers have become so famous for, thanks to me. You continue listening to me, you continue reading me, and you continue doing what it is you do, because ultimately you are on the fast track to making yourself look like an idiot, making your family look like idiots, making your country look idiotic, and making your God look like an idiot. Because after all, it would have to take one hell of an idiotic creator to create a species of talking apes that walk to and fro, engaging in this behavior and that, engaging in this activity and that, building this civilization and that, all leading up to a mighty culmination, a superb climax, and a wonderful display of flaming incompetence, buffoonery, and thuggery in the form of clandestine gang stalking. And that includes those of you that participate in the signaling mechanisms at church, in courtrooms, in public facilities, and in the workplace. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. I know your creator is sitting wherever he is in the cosmos right now, blushing, embarrassed that he created you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about extrajudicial activity here in the United States. What does extrajudicial mean? Extrajudicial means a state action that occurs outside of the jurisdiction or outside of the mandates or outside of the influence of the American courts. And in the United States, you have several varying degrees of judicial systems. You have the federal judiciary, which includes the Supreme Court and federal courts. And mind you, federal courts handle both criminal matters at the federal level and civil matters at the federal level. For example, white-collar crime, human trafficking, bank robbery, Ponzi schemes, insider trading, tax scams, business misgivings at the corporate level. These are the kinds of things that are prosecuted criminally in courts, federally in courts. These types of matters are handled at the federal level and typically carry stiffer penalties than criminal matters that are handled at the circuit court level or the court of common pleas level. And matters that will find themselves before federal judges at the in the civil capacity would be, for example, what we saw in the Manhattan courts with President Trump and his apparent discrepancies concerning the overall value of his Trump Organization enterprises and what was being written about the value of his enterprises in legally admissible documents. There was a discrepancy there, and there were federal courts that investigated that, both criminally and civilly. It looks as if President Trump has bounced back from that. You can't get mad at a man for beating the odds, for overcoming obstacles. And he's back in office. And from what I hear, he's accomplishing a lot of what he set out to. So that's positive. But ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, there are judicial matters that we need to discuss. In 2007, there was a controversy. And this controversy concerned the National Security Administration. And the controversy was as follows. There's a new federal auxiliary that was created in the aftermath of 9/11. It's called the National Security Agency, or the National Security Administration. This auxiliary was given broad powers in its creation, but given even more power to observe citizens, to surveil citizens, to gather data on citizens post 9/11, and with the implementation of the Patriot Act especially, which was one of those pieces of legislation that was directly aimed at national security concerns. However, it was at the expense of some personal freedoms, particularly concerning privacy, and it brought to the forefront the reality that in times of national security uncertainty, there are going to be, or there may be, laws passed by your Congress, laws approved by your president that may or may not breach your constitutional rights and liberties, and indeed breach your personal freedoms. You had some people that were angry at the powers given to the National Security Administration, particularly with respect to its ability to intrude into people's personal lives. For example, reading people's text messages without a warrant or any type of a search authorization, being able to intrude into people's emails, using laser sound boom equipment in people's living rooms to hear what their families are talking about, using stingray devices to intercept people's location constantly as they move about with their cell phones and other mobile devices. It includes the ability to intercept people's phone conversations and document the nature of those phone conversations and other interpersonal communication mechanisms. There were people who saw this and said, we don't like our government intruding into our personal lives in this capacity. We don't care what the national security situation is. And then there were other segments of the population that said, I'm willing to give up certain rights and freedoms in the interest of national security. Me personally, when this debate raged on, my thinking was this, and mind you, I was 22 years old at this time. If the National Security Agency is collecting my phone conversations and text messages and web activity and possibly my income information and other information as a national security measure, okay, as a way of making the homeland safer, as a way of giving me an opportunity to prosper, as a way of making it so that it would be more difficult for some calamity to come my way, okay, in an effort to increase the security of the homeland in an ever-changing world and an uncertain world. Well, as far as I'm concerned, let them do it. It's not going to affect me none. I ain't got nothing to hide. They can dig up every piece of information on me they want to. They're going to see a young man who's an American citizen. And that is all. So it didn't bother me none. It bothered a lot of people though. But see, me personally, I'm of the mindset where if you are a federal auxiliary and you are collecting my data without me knowing about it, and you're doing it extrajudicially, meaning you're doing it without court approval, you're doing it without a FISA warrant, you're doing it without the signature of a state, federal, or local judge, you're doing it outside of the court's jurisdiction, you're doing it outside of the court's power, you're doing it outside of the court's knowledge. And you're doing it outside of my knowledge. But despite that, go ahead. It's not going to bother me none. Because you're simply collecting data for a greater cause. And that greater cause is a greater understanding of human behavior in a changing world. Fine. That's what my tax dollars are going to. Okay. That sounds noble. That sounds high and mighty. That sounds wonderful. Do your job. However, if you are collecting my data, if you are intercepting my information, if you are collecting information on me, my biorhythm, my past, my present, my potential future, my motivations and ambitions, my interpersonal relationships, my work history, my credit history, my earning history, my earning potential, my academic history, and that of my significant other, that of my progeny. As a man, who values his inalienable rights, which are afforded to him by God, nature, and the Constitution, you'd better be using that information responsibly. You have not contacted a court. You have not sent me a summons. You have not gotten any kind of approval from anywhere. You've not gotten Senate instructions. You haven't gotten congressional instructions. You haven't gotten approval from the governor. You haven't gotten approval from the deputy governor. You haven't gotten approval from the federal legislature. You haven't gotten approval from the state legislature. You haven't gotten approval from the mayor's office. You haven't gotten approval from city council. You haven't gotten approval from the sheriff's office. You haven't gotten approval from the FBI. You haven't gotten approval from the Department of Justice. You haven't gotten approval from the Department of Defense. You haven't gotten anyone's approval but your own. And you were given that power as a member of the national security apparatus in this country as a preemptive measure. Let's stop bad things from happening in this country before they happen. Okay? That's your goal. You want to bypass the courts and intrude directly into my personal life, not quite to make me safer, but so that you can intercept my movements with a pack of bloodthirsty, aloof, useful idiot gang stalkers that communicate with each other with a system of signals, verbal commands, vehicular maneuvers, other physical gestures and signals, to point at me, the target, so as to mark me, so other gang stalkers in the vicinity know he's the threat, he's the guy we're watching, he's the one you pester. Use your domination tactics on him. I know he's a little tall. I know he's a little imposing looking, but we got big gang stalkers too. We got big boys we can bring out here. We can signal some big boys out here to pester him right in front of you, so you'll know that you're safe in your gang stalking activities. If that's the reason you're collecting my data, you can go right to hell. And not only that, and I'm talking to you, you liaisons, the ones who actually do this stuff. Not only can you go to the place where the devil hangs out, the place where Satan lives, the place where Lucifer gets his kicks, not only can you hang out there, but you can take your army of useful idiots with you. Okay, because you had to have known that this covert mischief that you participate in was going to be exposed at some point. Surely you didn't think you guys were going to be able to do this to people forever. This massive personnel mobilization mechanism where you use mobs of people to disrupt a person's trajectory through this world, using a system of covert signals so that it would be harder to identify you. And the reason you want it to be harder to identify you is because you know that the stuff you do is criminally insane. It's high crimes and misdemeanors. It's treason, because you're using federal resources in a destructive criminal capacity. Now, me and my significant other, Lori, have both seen quite a bit of clandestine gang stalking here in South Florida. And the brand of gang stalking here in South Florida is unique, because South Florida is an international geographic region. It's one of the only territorial regions in the United States that is not majority English speaking. It has a majority population of people whose parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents immigrated here from a communist country Mind you, communism and capitalism are starkly different in political philosophy. So what you have here in South Florida, with respect to myself, who my first language is English, I studied some Arabic in college, but it's not to the point where I could go to a Middle Eastern country and establish myself there. My Arabic is not that good, but I studied it in college. It's been about 11 years, so I'm a little behind in my Arabic, but I've taken it. It wouldn't be difficult to relearn it, should I have the time and ability. But I'm an English-speaking person. For me to come here to a majority, an area that is majority non-English speaking, a majority that has roots in communism as opposed to capitalism, and in an area where the communities are mostly homogenous, I was stunned to see the political climate here. The citizenry here acts with sovereignty as if it is a different part of the country altogether, a different part of the world altogether than the United States. There are times where it feels that South Florida, and I mean all of South Florida, not just Miami-Dade County, but all of South Florida, is its own country attached to the United States, and it is totally self-governing and sovereign, except for gang-stalking. Gang-stalking has found a way to permeate all of this culture that we see here, all of this glory and splendor that we see here in Miami-Dade County, in Broward County, in Palm Beach County, in Martin County, in St. Lucie County, all of these gorgeous counties in South Florida, all of these glorious high-rise architectural wonders that we see, all of the wealth, all of the culture, all of the beauty. It's coastal, it's warm year-round, there's only a few crappy bad weather days a year, a handful anyway. There's a lot here to be proud of if you're the majority, especially if you are a part of the majority. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, clearing my throat. Whose immediate ancestors migrated here from an island 100 miles away that at one time was considered a third world country. Your progeny has come to America, not exactly sure how. I don't know if it was all undocumented or if it was half and half, documented, half undocumented. But now this glorious county, which at one time was majority Jewish, is now majority Cuban. And I'm smack dead in the middle of this thing. Now, I'm not here, ladies and gentlemen, to observe the population culturally, racially, or demographically. I have, as a part of my job as a political commentator and as a chief executive officer, but my goal was not to come down here and observe the people, go to the beach, and enjoy the weather. That's not why I'm in South Florida. I am in South Florida, ladies and gentlemen, because the geographic region, the geographic climate here is conducive to my studies on gang stalking because it's warm most of the time. So that means people are out and about most of the time. So that means I can be out and about most of the time. And I'm able to observe people more closely, their actions, their movements, their disposition, and the way they carry about themselves inside and outside of my gang stalking campaign. And it allows me to observe people more closely because of the geographic climate. So when you talk about something being extrajudicial, you're basically saying either one of two things. A court order is not necessary to surveil this person, to disrupt this person, to gather information on this person, indeed change this person's very trajectory through time and space. A court order is not needed for that. We don't need the approval of a federal court. We don't need the approval of the Constitution. We're the national security apparatus in this country, and we know people and we know behaviors, and we think this guy is a good test subject for us. This guy here, this one talking, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, that's the guy we want for our test subject. And we don't care what the effect of our actions are on him. We are the government. We have been given broad powers over persons and jurisdictions, and we're going to exercise that power in any way we see fit. Because after all, there's an amoral gray area to national security. It can't be all ethical, can it? It can't be all what you see in the Superman movies, can it? Where there's a damsel in distress or some responsible tax-paying man in distress or some child in distress, or maybe it's a bunch of people in distress, and Superman swoops in with his shiny red cape on, rescues the pack from the perpetrators, apprehends the perpetrators, or whacks them into outer space and flies off looking for the next adventure. It's not quite that easy when you're talking about national security in today's world. When you're talking about national security in today's world, you're talking about people. You're talking about human psychology. You're talking about human inclinations. You're talking about human behavior. And you're talking about a human being's capacity to be either good or evil. At some point, the national security apparatus in this country had to make a decision. Are we going to be afraid to be wrong, or are we not going to be afraid to be wrong? What do I mean by wrong? Well, they were wrong with me. I'm not a terrorist, but I am in some kind of a module that you would expect a terrorist to be in. The Boston Marathon in 2013 was blown to smithereens by two brothers. They came from somewhere in the Caucasus region, the Tsarnaev brothers. They went to Walmart. They grabbed rice cookers. They made those rice cookers into improvised explosive devices. They put them in their book bags. They walked over to the Boston Marathon and waited till its climax, where the most people would be around and the most runners would be present, set their bombs down on the side of the event in the middle of a crowd, walked away and detonated those bombs, blowing up and killing dozens of people and injuring dozens more. A manhunt ensued. The older of the two brothers was killed in a chase, and the younger brother was caught, charged federally with acts of terrorism, and incarcerated for life. I believe he is in the Colorado Supermax as we speak. The Colorado Supermax being the world's most secure prison. So how did this come about in the age of national security? This happened in 2013. Both of those young men had terrorist ties. Both of them actively interacted with terrorists on Facebook. No lie. I mean, these two guys were so deep in the terrorist activity that they'd go to a local Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or some coffee shop, grab a cappuccino, sit down in the coffee shop, grab a newspaper, start reading it, pull out their cell phone, call some terrorists, and have a conversation right there in the middle of the restaurant. But no, you guys didn't need any extrajudicial warrants for them. You didn't need to skip a federal court's permission to track and surveil them. No. The Tsarnaev brothers, no. They're two nice young boys. They do boxing. They like Kazakhstani culture and heritage. They like Caucasus historical studies. They're educated young boys. They're nice immigrants. We don't need to track or surveil them. We'd much rather go after Emmanuel Isaiah Smith. Heck, he's at Tri-C right now, Cuyahoga Community College, trying to earn an associate degree. That's the guy we're going after. We don't want the guys that want to blow up a marathon. We want the guy trying to earn the degree. That's the one we want to disrupt. That's the one we want to surveil. That's the one we want to use our death by 1,000 cut technology mechanisms on. That's the guy we want. We want the one that gets up and goes to college and studies humanities and things like that. That's the one we want to surveil. That's the one we want to pester. That's the one we want to bring to his knees so as to humiliate him in front of the whole world and in front of everyone who's ever known him too. Because we found some people that knew this man from 5, 10, 20 years ago that want to see him harmed. And we're going to plug his old enemies into his gang-stalking campaign so they can have a hand in his demise. How dare he go and try and get a college degree? No, the Tsarnaev brothers, they can wait. We're going to use our National Security Agency and our Department of Homeland Security powers to get at Smith. Meanwhile, the Tsarnaev brothers are baking up a bomb and they blow up a marathon. Ladies and gentlemen, this is disgusting. It's disgusting and it's shameful and it's annoying and it's an embarrassment to this country. And the reason it's an embarrassment to this country is because, well, 5, 10, 50, 100, 1,000 years from now, Americans and non-Americans alike are going to look back on these days and say, wow, that must have been really embarrassing for a world superpower like the United States, a creditor nation, a nation who has always taken pride in its military prowess and its ability to progress Okay, the United States of America and its so-called melting pot, this big democratic experiment that the founding fathers of this country put together, allegedly. The documents are there. Okay, this so-called constitutional republic, but then you go and authorize essentially a personal disruption mechanism that's totally thuggish and useless, to say the least. And it's annoying. It's not scary because I'm not a fearful person. But I imagine that TIs who are less equipped to figure out what's going on might become scared of this. They might become scared of this. They sure chose a hell of a person to pick with, haven't they? I've gone online, I've started several gigantic, beautiful websites in which I have exposed this Leviathan for the destructive trash that it is, and it has no place in today's world at all. Find a more innovative way to keep your country safe than this clandestine thuggery. Okay? If you need more officers on the street, so you don't need to go out and find these useful idiots to take signals and pester people that you think might disrupt society. Because a lot of times you're wrong. And while you're using all these resources to disrupt so-and-so, the other so-and-so, goes out and does something heinous like what we saw the Sarnaev brothers do. Ultimately, what you've done, Congress, is you have unknowingly authorized biological terrorism against your citizens. Some of these stalkers you got running around here that use these undercover law enforcer or undercover Department of Defense stooges, a lot of these guys run around getting people sick with germs as a way of keeping them away from them. Okay, you got these signaling stooges running around, taking signals and giving signals to each other, taking these signals from liaisons. Everyone's behind the scenes, everyone's undercover, everyone's taking signals from everybody with the intent on making their section of the population look superior to my section of the population. Whatever that may be. Clearing my throat, ladies and gentlemen. So, what you have is, you have a modern day civil war between two factions of the population. You have the signaling faction and you have the non-signaling faction. The signaling faction are the aggressors. Okay? The non-signaling factions are essentially, they're defending themselves from the aggressors. And mind you, the aggressors are constantly nitpicking reasons to continue their pestering. If a targeted person is simply minding their own business, these stooge-like useful idiot gang stalkers and their liaisons will find a way to surround that person who is just minding their business and cause some sort of a conflict so they can create a false narrative concerning the targeted person's aggression, at which point they find a new reason to continue pestering that person. You see, it's constant retaliation. All of this is taxpayer funded and done under the banner of national security. That's shameful. And mind you, ladies and gentlemen, I do these discourses outside, and because of the background noise, I oftentimes have to project or raise my voice to drown out that background noise, so adjust your volume accordingly. This lecture is called Extrajudicial. Now, ladies and gentlemen, why do we even have courts is the question. Why can't we just let this secretive, covert operation scenario be the judge, jury, and executioner of every matter? Why don't we just eliminate the courts altogether? Let's eliminate the judicial system and allow these street theater stalkers to simply punish people on the spot for any crime they commit. They're already doing it, ladies and gentlemen, up to and including homicide. Yes, there are street theater using signal chucking stalkers that are dispatched when homicides are committed in certain places. If they find the killer before the police does, they have federal authority to execute that person without habeas corpus. Now, because a power over life and death has been given our national security apparatus without the use of habeas corpus, which is a constitutional right, and because this matter has not been approved by Congress or the will of the people, that makes it simply state-sanctioned murder. Now, look, I believe that people who commit violent acts of homicide that are not in self-defense, I think it's heinous and I think it's unfortunate. I've never had anybody in my family murdered that I know of, but I can only imagine that the people who have to experience such a horrific tragedy in their family must experience untold levels of grief. And they may be in favor of a national security apparatus that can go find the killer within weeks and take care of the job outside of the courts. Okay, that's called vigilante justice. I wouldn't doubt that there are instances of vigilante justice that have brought real justice to families. But ultimately, you're going to need a damn good reason for signaling sick, diseased gang stalkers to a targeted person's exact location with the instruction of sitting or standing as close to that person as possible, which will maximize the capacity for that person to contract an infection from the stalker. If you're not going and getting a federal warrant or some other authorization to commit such a heinous crime against a sovereign United States citizen, that makes you little more than an enemy belligerent and a coward. Okay? I think part of gang stalking's allure is its mystique. It's clandestinely structured, and it's difficult to quantify. Lots of targeted persons have attempted to quantify it, but they've had trouble because it's very complex, it's very sophisticated, it's very mobile, it's very resourced, it's very well resourced, and it's also made to be intimidating. So you have some targeted persons, I have no doubt. Now, again, assuming I'm not the only targeted person that there is, there have got to be some targeted people, in my estimation, if there are other targeted people, who simply just allow the system to overwhelm them and they basically just submit to it. I'm not a submitter. Do you understand? I am not the guy to impose such a constitutional misgiving upon. Okay, if you national security guys, you federal liaisons, okay, you bum signalers, and when I say you bum signalers, I don't care how much money you make. If you are utilizing a signaling protocol to harm, pester, or disrupt another sovereign citizen, I don't care what your job title is. I don't care what you think of me, my project, or quite frankly, I don't care what you think about this country either. You are a bum, and you are an unwanted, undesirable. And quite frankly, I am not your friend. If you use a signaling mechanism to try and disrupt, annoy, pester, or infect me while I'm going about my daily business, I don't want nothing to do with you. And this signaling mechanism is vast. Why are you using thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people per county to contain one person? The only other person that I associate with is my significant other, Lori, and I suspect she has gang stalkers as well. You really ought to be ashamed of yourself for that. Huh? You got guys who will try to abuse a woman physically that a court of law will punch in the mouth with domestic violence charges, which are permanent, so that that person, and jail time, so that that person will think twice, particularly that man will think twice next time he goes to try to abuse a woman or a child. Now, in spite of these tough domestic violence laws, we have gang stalkers who are men that are able to routinely attack women with this signaling mechanism without recourse whatsoever. So if a man is caught abusing a woman, he goes down for domestic violence. If you're a male gang stalker, though, and you go to pester a woman or hurt a woman or abuse or harm a woman or worse, you can scurry your punk ass off into the sunset after you do it. Why? Because a federal liaison signaled you to her. And he probably did it at such a time where there were no police present. So your sissy gang stalking ass wouldn't get caught abusing her. Now you all keep this crap up. Watch how bad it makes you, your families, your country, and your God look. You are not about to do this successfully. There's an old saying, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Ultimately, you have to pay the piper when that time rolls around. You cannot and will not make a mockery out of judicial principles, good governance, and the rule of law that have existed for about 10,000 years now. The first organized constitution came in Babylon, and it was written by the king of Babylon, whose name was Hammurabi. And this constitution was written on a stele, which is a stone tablet. And that constitution is called the Code of Hammurabi. And it is considered in many respects to be the first constitution. And quite frankly, given its age, its precepts ring true today. And quite frankly, there are certain constitutional precepts in the United States Constitution that mirror the precepts that are in Hammurabi's law. There are also elements of the United States Constitution that mirror Mosaic law. That was the laws that Moses wrote in the Old Testament. The law of Moses is a collection of 613 commandments that Moses wrote under the inspiration of Yahweh to give to the children of Israel so that they could conduct themselves in a manner that was civil and in a way that would be cohesive with their journey, which was from Egypt to Palestine. And they had to make that journey on foot. And that journey took 40 years to make. And during that 40 years, Moses had to implement laws and policies to govern the people so that they could make the trip successfully without exterminating themselves in the harsh conditions, having been newly freed from Egypt after 400 years of slavery. Now, if you look carefully at the judicial construct that Moses had, it resembled the American construct. He instituted a court of law, okay, where there were common pleas courts, then there were high courts, and then there was a Supreme Court, which Moses was the Chief Justice. That was the first instance in the entirety of the Bible of a sophisticated judicial system. Now, the law of Moses served as the legal code in those times. And if one of the Israelites were found breaking that legal code, they would go in front of one of these magistrates or judges based on the severity of the crime. That is almost a mirror image of what we have in the United States today. And you can look in the books of Exodus and Deuteronomy, if I'm not mistaken, and you will be able to find those instances of Moses' judicial system. Nothing happened outside of those courts, that I can promise you. And the reason I think that's significant is because you got a lot of religious people who claim to be adherents to scriptural precepts who participate in signaling. And they have abandoned not only the law of Moses, but they've abandoned the commandments of Moses, and they've abandoned the prophecies and the commandments and the love of Jesus Christ himself, because Christ said he was the fulfillment of the law of Moses. Now you tell me something, and this is aimed at Christians that participate in gang-stalking because you believe Christ has ordained or authorized this practice. If you lived in the Old Testament during the Iron Age and you attempted to do something against the law of Moses to such a degree where you were hassling people in such a way that could disrupt their trajectory through time and space as you've done now, the prophet Moses himself would have descended from his place as a high court judge and personally reprimanded and punished you as a detriment to the nation of Israel. I'm all for the separation of church and state. I'm a person that believes that the state should handle temporal matters and the church should handle spiritual matters, and the two should have a healthy distance from one another, given the stark difference in the nature of politics and religion. What you do with gang stalking is you merge the two in a very perverse way. You say, God has given me the mandate and he's given me the authority to organize essentially an extrajudicial militia that is answerable to no one, that can do anything so long as we keep it covert. As long as our activity is clandestine, we can do as we please, when we please, despite of the Constitution and despite your alienable rights. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the kind of mischief that will cause the collapse of an empire. I urge Congress, get up, comb through your national security legislation, and put an end to the scourge, put an end to the Leviathan. Thank you for listening.